Aloha! What's up, everybody? It's good to see you today. Oh man, I've been waiting to break this movie down. I've been watching this movie for 3 days. So get ready for some interesting topics and get ready to learn a lot, right? I like to learn stuff when I watch the movies instead of just being entertained or whatever. I get a lot. I'm like, wow, I can relate to that. Wow, that reminds me of so much stuff. And Marvel is no exception. Oh my God. That doesn't mean I am like the biggest Marvel fan, I guess, but the more I watch them, the more I am becoming a fan. Not just because of the cartoons and stuff, but just because there's so much truth that's been hidden and that's just shared with us. It's amazing. So good to see everybody in the chat. There's a new feature in the chat. I guess you can do live reactions now. You could press a heart and stuff like that. So feel free to play with that. Have fun with each other. Try to use the @ symbol to let everyone know who you're talking to and stuff, and spread the good vibes and share your theories, ideas, and information as we break down Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So let's check this out first. Brought to you by Mount Meru. That's how I like to say that. Usually I say that whenever it's like depends on the intro, but let's check this out. Marvel. Let's look at this Marvel. Now, who is the writer for Marvel? Well, many of us know it's Stan Lee, who passed away just a few years ago. Stan Lee he used to always make appearances in the Marvel movies and stuff, and he's famous for saying Excelsior or whatever, right? He says Excelsior. So let's check out Stan Lee. I don't know if you know this, but Stan Lee is a stage name. It's a pen name. Actually, it's a pseudonym. It's not his real name. So he chose it purposefully, which means, especially for writers that are constantly choosing specific names for their characters in comic books and movies and stuff, right? Names are descriptions. Names are, they describe the character. And he gave himself a character name, which is Stan Lee. So let's break down what that name means. Stan Lee, if we check out the word Stan, it comes from sta. So if you hear of like Afghanistan and a country ends with Stan, this is what it means. It comes from sta, which means to stand or to make firm or to be firm. Essentially something that comes up out of the earth. It sort of paints a picture of a mountain, right? Something that is a solid rock that is stuck there, that is a foundation, right? So to stand or to be firm. And then Lee, his last name Lee, if we check that out, it comes from a word that means shelter, cover, defense, or protection. So together, Stan Lee implies a type of Mount Meru symbolism, that mountain, that stronghold in the middle of the world, also known by many other names, but it's a place of safety up north, where many myths and legends and religions allude to as being a place that people go to survive the apocalypse or to survive dangerous conditions in the world, which we're gonna talk about that too. Now, Excelsior. He says Excelsior all the time. I had to look that up. What does that mean, right? Well, Ex means from out of, and Celere, which is the Celsior part, means rise high or a tower. So to come up out of a tall tower, something that comes out of a high rise, or something that comes out of a very tall structure, which would be Stan Lee, which would be the mountain of protection, right? So it's an allusion to the blue beam that comes up out of Mount Meru at the center of the world, which I'll show you some pictures of that in just a second when we look at Mount Meru. Now, related to Excelsior is the word cellar. And we've talked about cellar quite a few times because they always show the cellar door in the movies. And specifically in Donnie Darko, we went over the whole cellar door symbolism, right? So check this out. Cellar, from Latin cellarium, a pantry, a storeroom, literally means a group of cells, which is either directly from cella, which means a small room, or a storeroom, and it's from the Proto-Indo-European root word kel, which means to cover, to conceal, or save. But the interesting part is this right here, where it says it literally means a group of cells, like a cellular structure, right, on a small form, which is what Ant-Man and the quantum universe is all about, is going... The movie's going to show it to you like it only exists in small form, but I'm going to blow your minds and show you that the quantum verse, or the quantum universe, I call it the fractalverse because I feel that's more appropriate, exists outside of our world and what people think is space. We're going to get into that too. Now, back to Marvel. Marvel, check this out. So what does Marvel mean? Marvel comes from the root maru. That V actually used to be a U. I'll show you. But it comes from maru El, which means the gods of Maru, or the mighty leaders of Meru, or Mount Meru. So Marvel Studios. So everything that Marvel makes is in relation to that mountain, right? The mountain where the superheroes are born, the gods of old, etc. And all these legends stem down from us. All they did was they took these ancient stories and truths and they cartoonified them. They made them into caricatures and whatnot, right? So if we look up the word Marvel, we see it means a wonderful story or a legend. All of these words that are related to the word Marvel, they harken back to our ancient Oblivion, the times that we have forgotten about that have happened so long ago that we consider them to be fantasy and fiction and folklore and myth and legend. It's also related to the word mir, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European root mer, which means to gleam, to sparkle, and to glimmer, or to shine, you could say, right? So Maru is of the gleam, or of the glimmer, or of that sparkle, that shine, that blue beam, that light, basically, right? And that's one version of the word mer. And it also says here that in Sanskrit, the word is related to ray or beam. The blue beam, right? Just like how we've been talking about so often, that blue beam of energy that comes up out of the world. Also, there's another one, mere, which means sea, ocean, or lake. So Meru, Mount Meru specifically, is that tallest mountain in the world, according to the legends and the myths, the mountain of the gods or superheroes, that shot up out of a central lake, out of the middle of what we would now call the Atlantic Ocean. It is the mountain out of the water. It is a tall tower that just rises up out of the water, a magnetic tall mountain rising up out of the water. There's another definition of mere, which implies a boundary line. Mount Meru represents the ends of the earth. It is the boundary before you go inside of the earth into the hollow recesses, or you ride that blue beam, if that's possible, up to the sky, and you can escape whenever the sky opens up during worldwide depressurization from time to time. And in Old Norse, it says Mary, which means, obviously, there's Mother Mary, which is where this comes from. And the light of the world is born out of Mother Mary. And it says a boundary, a borderland, and related to the word wall, because this is not like a mountain that just kind of gradually rises up. This is a tower that has been pulled up. It is earth that has been pulled up by such a strong electrical force that it pulls the mud and the debris and stuff up, and it petrifies it, and it hardens it into a mountainous tower, or what I call a plasma volcano. If we continue, we see that there's actually a word related to mere, that last one we talked about, called a mere stake, or a mere stake, which means a pole or a tree standing as a mark or a boundary. And at the bottom, you can see there used to be a saying called the mares of the earth, the meres of the earth, which meant the ends of the earth. Mount Meru was the end of the earth. It was the beginning of the earth and the end of the earth. It was the place right in the middle where all of the energy either retracts and goes down into the earth while it charges, or comes up in a brilliant beam of plasma that moves about in the sky that everybody can see. All right, so it says here, by the mid-16th century, the V form, or the letter V, was used to represent the consonant and the letter U. U and V were not accepted as distinct letters or separate letters until many, many years later, after the mid-16th century. So before that, if you ever see like Marvel, it's actually Maruel. That's what it is. So those of Mount Meru, the world mountain, right? Myths and legends of people about Mount Meru, the axis mundi at the center of our world. You can see depictions, ancient depictions in Hinduism and Buddhism and other religions and belief systems too, of Mount Meru. For example, let's look at this sort of mandala here, or mandala, or however you say that. This is an image of Mount Meru. You see that? Now watch, I'm going to show you something here. Check this out. This is the mountain down here at the bottom. This is a plasma volcano. It's a split mountain, according to the legends. And there is a blue beam that shoots up and tears itself off as it goes up and higher into the sky. But if we back off, we can see at the top of it, there's this symbol too, this star right at the top, and a circle around that. That's the top of the firmament, as it used to be called in the old days, where there's an upside down, dome. So there's a little mini dome that's upside down, and I'll have to explain how that works. I've gone over that in other videos, but it takes too long to explain. But there's an upside down dome that's responsible for projecting things into our sky. And it's smaller than the larger dome around us, right? And in the middle of that dome, whenever our world depressurizes, it creates a hole, or the pupil of the all-seeing eye, you could say, right? And that's represented by this star form right here in the middle. That blue beam reaches straight up and it touches that depressurization point. You can also see that it's surrounded by these 4 different lands. There's always these 4 lands right here. Those are the secret hidden lands at the middle of the world. This is an artist's rendition of it. Me, actually, I made this. So I like to make images of Mount Meru from time to time, but it is the dark mountain, the black mountain, Rupus Nigra, with this blue beam that shoots up and out of it, the light of the world, filling the world with fresh oxygen and imbuing us with regenerative qualities, and essentially giving many of us superpowers, right? All right, here's another example of Mount Meru that could be found. Here's another example of Mount Meru. It used to be included on many of the old maps around the world. There are a few different mountains in the world called Mount Meru, but they are not the original Mount Meru. They have been renamed. They have been named after the quintessential mountain, the mountain that was talked about in the legends and whatnot, right? So they renamed this one. This one right here is in Africa. It's one of the tallest mountains in Africa, and it is a volcano, right? Mount Meru is a type of volcano. It is a volcano, but I call it a plasma volcano. All right, so here's another depiction of it. I believe this is in Hinduism or Buddhism, and you can see they actually sometimes will draw the blue beam that comes up out of this plasma volcano, Mount Meru. They show you the blue beam right there, and then it goes up and it creates these little branches, which gives rise to like the world tree concept, right? Here's another depiction of it being a tower, a black tower, a dark tower in the middle of the world that connects our world or realm to other realms. If you go down inside of it, you can get down into the earth and go into those realms, or you can go all the way up and you can leave this world, basically. Here's another picture of it here. Now, we begin the movie. Already we are inside of the quantum realm, which I call the fractalverse. We are in the fractalverse right now, okay? I believe that everything is fractal in nature, that everything is sort of holographic and it's repetitive over and over and over, and that there are many other Earths out there, that there are many alternate versions of this exact same place because the information is repetitive and it's looped to save energy and stuff like that. So there are other Earths, just like in that show Sliders a long time ago, or even in the DC worlds, they have alternate Earths and stuff like that, right? Not that there are other planets that are just totally alien and totally different. They're very much Earth. They're just different Earths where things have evolved or history has been slightly different than our history, right? The events are slightly different, but all of that DNA and all that stuff is on a loop and it's repetitive. And you can go there and you can see versions of yourself or other people, right? So this is what it looks like. Let's take a look at the depictions of the fractalverse, right? Now, in your mind, many people, you can basically say this is space, okay? I believe, so far, based on my research, that what we call space is just the dark part of our sky underneath the firmament or underneath the dome that is above us, right? It goes way up high and it does get very dark and you can see the stars and everything. But when you hit that boundary, when you hit that barrier, on the other side of it, this is what it looks like. This is now remember, this is a cartoonification as well. These are just drawings of it, right? But if you use comparative mythology and you apply it to all of these different movies, you can see, like this is a scene from Ant-Man where you can see what it looks like on the inside. This one right here reminded me of Big Hero 6. Whenever they went through that portal in the sky, which is a hole in the sky that opened up, they left Earth. They went onto the other side of the dome, and this is what it looks like. It's not space whatsoever. It is the fullness. It is full of all kinds of stuff, and they have these little holes all over the place, like passageways. This is from R.I.P.D. whenever a hole opened up in his sky, and he was sucked up, which is going to happen whenever the world depressurizes and buoyancy increases dramatically for a time. Things get sucked up and they leave and they go out of our world, and you can see all these little holes. It's like a beehive. that like, it's like space is a beehive or something like that, right? I'm just using that as a comparison. But you can see all those little holes that take you into these other worlds. This one's really interesting too. It reminds me of Willy Wonka. Whenever they drank the bubbles or whatever and they were floating up to that fan. That's kind of what that reminds me of. Also the Red Hot Chili Peppers logo too. Doctor Who. In Doctor Who at the beginning, you can see that he's traveling through space and time, but really he's taking shortcuts through the fractalverse to get to these alternate Earths to help out those different civilizations on those other worlds. You can see this portrayed in Star Trek, right? In Star Trek, they have what they call the mycelial network. And whenever they go through the mycelial network, which is basically space, it's basically outside of the domes of all of the dark cities, which are the worlds that are enclosed, right? This is what it looks like when you're going through this mycelial network. You see all those little lines and passages and whatnot? Those are plasma conduits. This girl, she lands and she's like, I'm in the mycelial network. And it's always portrayed as being like you're in a black light room or something, and everything's very neon and sort of Avatar world, Pandora looking, right? But you'll notice that you have all of these little columns and beams and stuff that go through the fractalverse. These are plasma conduits, right? They are hallways, literally hallways, that are designed, they're like freeways. They're hallways, they're freeways. They're designed to transport, okay? These are transportation conduits or hallways or whatever, where it sends energy and information and objects and other stuff from one world or from one hub to another one. The question is why? Your brain works just like this. This is what your brain would look like if you could shrink down super small and go into your own brain or somebody else's brain. You could say the mind of God. This is from the Circuits of Time, from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. The exact same idea. It's the fractalverse. When you leave this world, you travel through those plasma conduits and they take you to other realms and other places. And, if you know where you're going, all the more power to you. If you don't, you'll be lost, like like in the show Sliders, like they're just trying to get back to their world or whatever. This is from Interstellar, right? This is a type of fractalverse that's pictured in the Tesseract, right? So the Tesseract is a type of fractalverse. Also, you notice this type of symbolism in Labyrinth. Whenever she's in that one room where everything's kind of upside down and right side up and sideways and all the stairs and gravity acts all weird, or what people perceive as gravity acts all strange, and you could be pulled in one direction or another direction, and it's not constant. It's not consistent because you're out there in the fractalverse and you're being affected by all those various things that are the fullness of space. All right, so that takes us back to the beginning, and the main character, she's like the mom in the movie. She's looking out into the fractalverse. She's stuck there. She's stuck down into the fractalverse, and in the movie, she's super tiny. But in reality, she's outside of the worlds. She's in between worlds right now. It's like the back rooms. She's in between worlds. She's looking at all these different hallways that lead to other worlds, but she's stuck in between them. It's kind of like a form of limbo, or you might say purgatory or something. And out there are otherworldly aliens or strange creatures that I call the Fantazoids. These are the macrocosmic version of insects and animals and beings that have made their home between worlds, right? Like if you're familiar with the creepypasta called The Backrooms, these would be the entities that are in the backrooms, right? Now check this one out right here. Notice how it looks, right? I pay attention to how they make these monsters look over time. And I relate this to a Love, Death, and Robots episode called Suits, where there were these farmers. But in that show, there's these aliens that break through this dome and they start crawling all over it. And the aliens are a type of Fantazoid that I call like the devil dogs, the hellhounds, right? Usually they have 4 legs, or they have 4 feet or whatever, and they crawl around and they're kind of like dogs, but like hellish, monstrous looking, like insectoid dogs or something. And you can see in this episode, they're crawling all over that dome on the outside of this world. They zoom all the way out and they show you that it's a domed world, and there's just on the other side of it, there are all these otherworldly fractalverse creatures that are just living there. So when our world depressurizes and a hole opens up in our sky, a lot of those creatures fall down into our world, or they float down into our world, and this becomes their new home. They become monsters of old and strange creatures. Oftentimes, you can see the different attributes that we have tapped into because we recognize what they look like through our collective subconscious, right? The more we use our creativity to start drawing these types of beings, and we don't force it, the easier that information comes in. This one reminds me of like Venom. I think I've got a picture of Venom. But here are some ideas. These are the same types of creature. This one's from A Quiet Place, I believe, right? This is from that same Love, Death, and Robots show I was telling you about. We got one here. This is from the Eternals, which we also broke down. So you can check that one out. Hey, thanks for the donation. Super appreciate you, Boogled. Obviously, there's the what are they called? Xenobites or xenomorphs or whatever, right? From Alien. Same exact type of creature, right? Oftentimes you'll notice that their face opens up. Like sometimes they don't actually have a mouth, but they have like the front part of what we would call a head just opens up, and they have like mouths that are incredibly large. They walk around on 4 legs like this creature right here. This is in Star Trek. And take note of the colors too. Oftentimes they're a very dull gray, but they kind of shine like they're wet. Like they have this shimmer to them, right? Kind of like dolphins do, right? And you can see this creature actually opens its face up too, just like the Demigorgon. Here's another example from another episode of, I think this might be Black Mirror. I can't remember. But these are the same types of creatures, right? Obviously Venom, right? It's opening up his mouth. Now, in the movie, we go to a place... There's this guy that makes these PIM particles. PIM particles are in the Marvel universe, these tiny little particles that allow people to grow super big or shrink super small, which sounds to me very much reminiscent of stem cells. Sounds a lot like stem cells. Stem cells can become any cell. They can change. They can morph. They're basically like the X gene in the X-Men, right? So if we check out the name of this place, it's called Pim Van Dyne. So these are the names of the people, but it's also, hey, thanks again, super appreciate it. These are the names of the people. Pim Van Dyne. Thanks again to Boogled. All right, so let's check out and break this down. Pim, P-Y-M. Now this was not an easy one to research, but P-Y is the root of this word. The M is what makes it plural in the old languages, okay? So if we look it up, I couldn't find anything on PM. It's too short. Sometimes if those words are super short, they're hard to reverse engineer, but I was able to because I looked at related words, all of these related words, and I went to the word physical because I realized that in the ancient language, the P is often actually a PH, right? Like a F, like Phoenician or things like that, right? So I looked up PHY for PIM, right? And if we look that up, it says, thank you so much for all the donations. If we look that up, it says it means to grow. It comes from a word that means to grow, ultimately from the Proto-Indo-European word bua, which means to appear, to become, and to rise up, to get bigger, right? To grow in size, to increase in size. The way you say this word in Greek is phio, right? Like, this is probably the root of like Phoenician and fire and things like that too. And then we look at dyne, D-Y-N-E. I've seen this word come up quite often when watching the movies too, right? Especially in like Terminator. The name of the company that made those robots was they had dyne in their names too. Oh, you guys are so kind. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much, Alien Guru. All right, so check this out. From the French word dîner, which means force. A force, right? So dîner is exactly like the word djinn, right? It's the exact same. If you look up dîner or dyne, D-Y-N-E, that Y is actually an I or a J in the ancient languages. So it's actually jinne or jinn, right? A force, and a spiritual force or a genie, etc., right? Spirits and stuff like that. So Pim Van Dyne could be translated to giants from a force, right? An electromagnetic force. It says here, Pim particles, the blue solution of the Pim particles, they got blue and red ones, like the blue pill and the red pill. It says the blue solution allows the user to grow, while the red is used to shrink an individual, right? Just like whenever we have those blue beams that shoot up into our world, those columns and those pillars of light, that gives rise to gigantism, to titans, to quote unquote dinosaurs, which are really just Fantazoids and our our bugs that grow to gigantic sizes with increased oxygen in our world, right? So really interesting. He takes the PIM particles, they put it onto a little pizza. You can watch it grow. You can watch it get bigger. Basically just injected the pizza with some fast-acting stem cells. Now we get to this. They're showing an ant colony, and they're showing that the ants are super advanced, and they started like developing their own technology and stuff like that. And they're watching them and they're studying the ants. So Ant-Man says, "Are you doing this? Like, are you making them do this?" And his dad, Hank, says, "Actually, no, they built their own tech. These ant friends of theirs down inside of that little world created their own technology, and those ants are experiencing time differently than Ant-Man, who's gigantic right behind them." We're going to come to time differential in just a bit. We're going to talk a lot about time. He says pretty smart ants, right? And they are pretty smart. And we're going to talk about the ant people and all of that fun stuff in just a bit. So they open up this little portal, which is representative by that little blue light back there. That blue light represents like the blue light of the world, the blue beam. And they get sucked into this and they go down into the quantum world. Now, keep in mind, you can go down into the earth itself, and I believe we're already small. I believe we're going to talk about this too. I think we're shrink. We are shrunken people. We're tiny people. We might feel tall if you're 6 feet or even 7 feet or whatever, but that's tiny compared to the way it used to be when giants were the norm, when everybody was a giant, and people like us were considered like little tiny, super strong individuals or superheroes and stuff like that, men of renown, men of old, etc. So they go down into the little Mount Meru symbolism there. They get sucked down into the quantum realm. Now, take a look at the quantum realm. They flash these images by so fast. Silver Phoenix, thank you. They flash these images so fast, but look at it. What does the quantum realm resemble? What does it look like? Clearly, they are inside of a larger organism. They're inside of something. It's not just the air. You know what I mean? Now, in the movies, they'll have you believe like, oh no, like this is just like another dimension. And they sort of spookify it. You know, if that's a word, they spookify it. They make it kind of mysterious and stuff instead of examining it analytically and stating the obvious. A child that knows about biology could say, oh, they're inside of a body. They're inside of another organism right now, right? And you can see all the little parts that are inside of that body. For us, that would be the body of what we call God, the mind of God, the brain of God, or whatever body part. Some people think we live in an eyeball. Some people think we live in the spinal cord, the nape of the neck. It could be the brain, but it definitely looks like it is inside of another organism. Once they get inside there, you can see the plasma conduits. You can see those pillars that are worshipped the world across, from religion to religion, belief system to belief system, culture to culture. There are rod symbolism all over the place. Rods, pillars, columns, shafts, towers, all kinds of things that people worshipped. And unfortunately, in the modern world, we have taken that to mean that they worshipped the sexual organ, which I don't think so at all. You guys are hyping me up with all these donations. I super appreciate it. Thank you. I'm just going to say thank you in advance. If there's a bunch of them, I'm saying super thank you to everybody. I'm still going to say thank you. But anyways, all right, so check it out. I want to share this with you. Now we are in the quantum realm. Imagine you and I and everybody in the chat, we've gotten into the magic school bus inside of the earth, or we've gotten into the magic school bus, right? And with Mrs. Fritz, and we're able to leave our world. Let's say we go up through the sky. We could equally go down. We could go down into the world and you'll see stuff like this, right? But if we go up past the borders, past the boundary, past the rim of the world, past the sky or the skyline or whatever, then we will see these plasma conduits, these circuits of time, and you'll see that everything is sort of out of place, right? That there is no law of like gravity or whatever that's holding us down. It's a totally different thing where stuff is floating around and things, just like in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, right? They had this exact same place. This is a type of fractalverse symbolism. You can see that blue light there too, surrounded by 4 pillars, 4 columns, which represent, Mount Meru. And we don't have the only Mount Meru. There's a Mount Meru on every single world. Okay. There's an entrance and an exit on every single world. And it stands to reason that they would act very similar to one another, right? Because they're repetitive. So you can see this, all the symbolism that's here, especially in this movie where they have these 4 pillars that surround it, acting as these 4 creatures that are like always around the throne of God, worshiping, you know, the light or whatever. Now this creature pops open. I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's this weird creature. They're running from this creature right here. See? Take a look at this creature. Now, if we're inside of another body, if we're inside of, you know, another organism, and we're like the Who's in Whoville and we're super tiny or something, what could this creature possibly be? Take a look at it, right? It looks a lot, striking resemblance to a paramecium, right? A tiny microscopic creature that lives in water. Interestingly enough, right? The water's above. Looks just like a paramecium. John Smith just gifted memberships to people in the chat. So at random, some of you, 5 of you, are going to get memberships to my channel. Right on. Congratulations. Thank you, John Smith. Right on. Let's all thank John Smith. All right. So here's what a paramecium looks like, right? So let's take a look at this and let's compare it to the creature. You see, it's like, it even has like the little tendrils or whatnot, like on the side and stuff like that, exactly like a paramecium would. They even have this one colored the same, which is really interesting too. So you have these microscopic things that are designed to do different things within the body, just like within our body. So keep in mind, while we're breaking this down, that we are not just watching symbolically, you know, stuff that's happening out there beyond our sky in the fractalverse on the great grand scale. We are also watching what is happening right now as you are watching this video inside of your very own mind, in your brain, in your body. These things, these creatures, these superheroes and stuff would be equally, and this is why I call it fractal. It's a fractalverse. This is all happening inside, and they are fighting for you. There's a war going on inside of each and every one of you in your universe, in your body, okay? In your heavenly kingdom within yourself, all of these different individual elements, billions and trillions upon trillions of them that you're unaware of, that you don't even know, but they all collectively have an effect on you. There's a war waging to help you out, right? So we meet some of these people and they're surprised. They've been down there and they never met anyone before. And they said, there's quantum people in the quantum realm? What? Yes. It's fractal, right? So if we live in the quantum realm or in the fractalverse, right? We're not aware of it. Many of us are not aware of it because we're covered. There's a big old covering around us and we can't see it because there's a roof over our heads and there's ground under our feet. And we live in a dark city with a couple of night lights that spin around it. But if you were to remove the canopy of the heavens, you would see the vastness and the beauty and the brightness and the splendor of what people typically refer to as heaven. Now, this is a homunculus. So if we go back over here, these people, these creatures that live inside of the fractalverse or inside of the body or the brain specifically of another creature, which means even in your mind right now, these tiny microscopic entities, creatures, people, you could call them, right? Monsters, all kinds of stuff. These are what used to be known in alchemy as homunculi or the homunculus. Now, the homunculus, if you look that up, it says it's supposed to be microscopic, but a fully formed human being, right? That's really interesting. A microscopic, but a fully formed human being, a homunculus. Now, let me show you an example of cartoonification, okay? Now, the homunculus would be me. You're looking at me. I'm a homunculus. If in fact I live inside of the fractalverse and I am, and so are you, inside of a greater creature, all right, or an entity or an organism or whatever, then I am that. It's just that is a misconception. That is us attempting to scratch the surface, okay? This is a cartoonification. It's a caricature of us. And those us's, or those microscopic micronauts that live inside of our minds and our bodies, right? The reason that it's disproportionate and it's got giant hands and big lips and stuff, this is how they used to draw them. The reason is because they knew it lived in the mind. They knew, or the brain specifically, right? That there were these little creatures, little humanoids, you could say, that live inside of the brain. So they figured that it must be like, you know, wrapped around the brain. So they associated certain parts of the brain with certain parts of the homunculus. So the more important parts were made bigger, right? Now, this harkens back to an old comic book I used to collect this particular comic book, but it's called the Micronauts. It's a much lesser known group of superheroes and stuff, but the Micronauts are the superheroes. Thank you so much again for your donations. Appreciate you, Boogled. The Micronauts are a lesser known form of superheroes that exist within the fractalverse, the tiny microscopic form. And remember, microscopic all depends on your perspective and what you're comparing it to. Everything is relative. So it says they came from inner space, the Micronauts, the tiny, super tiny, just like Ant-Man, right? They came from inner space. That word inner space caught my attention. And I realized there are many references to this, right? The Inner Space movie. Steven Spielberg made a movie about this guy right here who shrinks way down inside of this little spaceship, and he goes inside of this guy's head, inside of his mind or his body or whatever, and it looks like he's in space. Oops. Looks like he's in a different world. It looks like he's in another place, but he's actually inside of a larger organism. I'm getting caught back up now. My bad. All right. So where were we? Inner space? Man, I hate it when I do that. All right. So we were at Inner Space, the movie, and I'm going to show you some more examples where you can see Hollywood showing you the fractalverse, or what we would call space that lies just beyond our sky, right? All right, so let's check this out. The Micronauts came from inner space. There's the movie Inner Space. There's Fantastic Voyage, which was about the same concept, people shrinking down and going inside of the human body. Here's a picture from Fantastic Voyage, and you can see it looks much like the fractalverse, being that it is the fullness, not space. What we call space is the space between the earth and the sky, because the sky has a limit. The sky has a limitation to it. There was also this cool TV show back in like the late 80s, early 90s called Herman's Head. These are all homunculi. These are homunculuses, you could say, and they represent those creatures, those beings that are inside of our brains that are living out their lives, and unbeknownst to us, and probably unbeknownst to them sometimes, the way they live out their lives and the actions that they are choosing are actually altogether developing in what is known as an action potential within us, the larger body. An action potential means when you have a decision to make, do you choose good or do you choose bad? These homunculi, and by extension ourselves, are literally the angels and the devils on the shoulder of greater beings, whispering into their ears to help them out and to try to influence them to do good or to do evil. Just like in Disney's Pixar, all of these little creatures that were influencing a greater being, just like in Osmosis Jones, these tiny little creatures that live inside of the human body, just like in Meet Dave, right? Where these tiny little people live inside of this huge, gigantic, godlike creature. Also, in Buckaroo Banzai, which we also broke down. Buckaroo Banzai across the 8th dimension. The 8th dimension is the fractalverse. Buckaroo Banzai goes right into this mountain, and he becomes so small that you can see, it looks just like this. This is a picture of the 8th dimension in Buckaroo Banzai, and you can see that there are little organisms and stuff inside of the 8th dimension, which is the fractalverse. Also, every single Dr. Seuss story ever written is... All right, Herman's Head was a good one. I like that show. Every single Dr. Seuss story ever written, all of those characters, even this elephant, okay, all of those characters live within the fractalverse. They're all super tiny. Now, in Horton Hears a Who, he picks up a flower, and there's a speck on the flower. You see that speck right there? And that speck is an entire world, or you could say universe, where there's tinier creatures than him. And he hears one and he pays attention to it and he considers these tiny creatures. And what he doesn't realize is that he is also a tiny creature, probably living on the top of some other flower or something like that, because it is fractal in nature. Now, back to these superheroes called the Micronauts. It says that the Micronauts originate in the microverse. Right? So the quantum realm is just a fancy way of saying the microverse, but they couldn't use certain words like microverse and micronauts because Hasbro bought the rights to those things, right? So they had to change the names and some of the characters and stuff. So it says the microverse is a microscopic universe. Microscopic universe. A microverse is a dimension that can be reached from the Earth dimension by shrinking with PIM particles, which is what we were talking about earlier, right? Those sort of stem cell type particles. What's really interesting because with stem cells, they can actually grow and increase in mass and become gigantic, or they can shrink. just like the PIM particles, right? So here's another example of it. You can see all the little micronauts out there in the background. And then they're walking around exploring the fractalverse, and they say it's a place outside of time and space, right? Well, space is our sky. That's a lot of space between the ground and the firmament above, right? So that's space. So the fractalverse does lie outside of it, but also inside of it too. We're a part of it. We're not aware of it. That's all, right? Farida! Hey, thank you, Farida. Appreciate you. Guten Tag. Thank you. Super appreciate you. All right. Outside of time and space. Now, time, we're going to talk about in just a second, so I'll save time for just a bit. And she says it's a secret universe. This is a secret universe. Beyond our skies is a secret universe that we are completely unaware of because we have been tricked into thinking, and this is all my perspective, but I'm sharing it with you. We've been tricked into thinking that when we're looking up at the ceiling, the dark ceiling with a few lights emanating from it or being projected out of it, right? That we're convinced that we can look through it and that we're imagining we could travel through all that blackness and darkness, when the reality is everybody knows heaven is bright. Everybody knows that. And if you ask where heaven is, they'll point up, right? So it's contradictory that we look up and we see darkness, but we are told that heaven is a bright place. The Elysian fields, the heavens, etc., we know it's a bright place. So up there is actually very bright. And beneath ours, you can also go downwards into the hollow recesses of our world and beyond in order to access the fractalverse. Now check this out. It says here that, speaking of the microverse and the micronauts, right? The microverse, listen to this. The region usually referred to by that name, the microverse, is a specific realm that was created by Prince Wayfinder, a time traveler from the future of Earth number 7614. I like that they do that. He and his followers, Prince Wayfinder, he and his followers traveled back in time 65 million years ago to Earth number 616 using, hold on, I want to zoom in, using the sword in the star as a home for his displaced people, and it was held together by the Enigma force, plasma, electromagnetic energy, right? So let me read this one more time because I want to paraphrase. This is sort of the lore. This is some backstory to Ant-Man and the whole MCU, the whole, wow, I got a lot of popcorn. So, wow, you guys are awesome. Thanks, Shimmy Shake. I appreciate all you guys. All right, so check this out. There was a guy named Prince Wayfinder, the one who finds the way, which represents us who are called every other apocalyptic cycle or every apocalyptic cycle to a place of safety, which is Mount Meru. We find our way. We look for the way back home so we can stay safe and so we can escape. So we can get out of here. Nobody wants to repeat the cycle over and over and over, constantly being reincarnated, constantly forgetting about your prior experiences in life. And you have to like tune into it and tap into it and rely upon, spirit memory or deja vu and stuff like that. People want to get out when they're done with the lesson, right? They don't want to repeat the lesson if they already learned the lesson. So Prince Wayfinder goes to find the way, and he finds it by the sword in the star. I'm going to come back to the sword in the star and show you a picture of it. Now, it says the origins of the sword in the star are unclear, although legend has it that it may be a future incarnation of Excalibur, which is the sword in the stone, the beam of light coming out of or stuck in Mount Meru. That's what that symbolizes. It's also the singing sword because of the electricity makes a lot of noise. All right, so it's seen as an incarnation of Excalibur, and that the star that it was embedded in, that would be the hole in the sky that's brightly lit, right? The all-seeing eye that we were talking about, because it touches that. The star it was embedded in was the ultimate form of Galactus, which I'm going to show you in just a second. Galactus is a world eater. Okay, there are different types of world eaters, world destroyers. Every single one of them represents a type of Cthulhu creature that is this cosmic god or type of god-like entity that is out there just beyond our sky, waiting, sleeping, waiting for the right moment when the time comes where it can invade, where it can come in and ground itself, and it destroys and changes everything, right? So an incarnation of Excalibur, and it was a form of Galactus, that star above. Approximately 15,000 years in Earth's future, Prince Wayfinder discovered the sword and used it to save his people. That would be that blue beam, right? So people from time to time recall, they remember. They have that spirit memory, or they're just led. They tune into the ether itself and they become prophets and stuff like that, right? Transporting them 3 million years back into the past to find a new home. So they used this sword, and when they used this sword, they were transported back into the past. That's because when you see that sword appear, or that blue beam or that light appear coming out of Mount Meru, the light of the world appears, that means that your world will be thrown into the Stone Age. Okay, all the technology will be wiped out, it will be sucked out, it will be destroyed, and we will all be thrown, if you stay, back into a Stone Age type of a place. It continues on and it says, when it became apparent that prehistoric Earth was not the home that they were seeking, so they didn't want to stay here, right? During the apocalypse. That's not their home. They wanted to leave this world and go out, venture through the fractalverse and choose which worlds they go to, right? Just like other beings who land in our world from time to time. The sword, which appears to be sentient, which it is, created the microverse for them instead, which means they used this sword to travel into the fractalverse. Now, Galactus, that star in the sky that the sword touches, Galactus is a cosmic being that consumes the energy that is found in planets for sustenance. Galactus is a type of world eater, which is Kronos, right? Hey, Mark Shoemaker, thank you. He says, keep it up, keep it up. Oh, look at that splash. That was a good one. Nice popcorn splash. That's awesome. Thank you. All right. It says that Galactus usually appoints heralds. Now, a herald is somebody who comes before a king or a prince or royalty and announces that they're on the way, which is a form of a prophet, right? People who rise up and they start warning everybody. They start trying to prepare the way because this event is inevitable. It is on the way. So he appoints heralds such as the Silver Surfer, which is like basically comets in the sky that start happening. That these are warnings and indications that we're going to hit the apocalypse soon. And scouts for suitable worlds, and he empowers them with the power cosmic. So here's an example. This is actually from the video game Fortnite. I did play this one. This is super fun, but this is Galactus sucking in, right? Sucking in all the stuff from the earth. There's various Native American legends that talk about this sort of evil god that lived in the sky that opened its mouth up and sucked all the people into it. It's a Yee. I believe we did a video about It's a Yee as well, and the Nez Perce tribe. But anyways, when that deity dies, they're cut off, right? From the perspective of living down here, if you were to survive the apocalypse, right, and you would see Kronos or Galactus open up his mouth and start sucking everything up because there's an increased buoyancy factor because the entire atmosphere of our world is depressurizing and buoyancy increases dramatically for a short time, things float and the winds pick up and everything starts getting sucked up into the sky, like in Mary Poppins, right? But that's only for a time during the electromagnetic neutral point. When we get past the neutral point, which usually lasts for about 3 days, or a maximum, I would say, of 3 days, right? Then that electromagnetic barrier goes back up around our world. That dome reinserts itself, and it goes back up and it seals itself off, which means it cuts off all of that red plasma that is wrapped around our world called the plasmasphere, and it cuts off these fingers of God, and it gets rid of the destroyer, basically. So the dome is literally a shield for our world. It's a protective covering. So it says here, the sword, we were talking about that sword stuck in the star. The sword apparently died after using the last of its energy. Now, in our world, when that sword dies, that means it's using the last of its energy inside the earth and it goes back down, right? So when it goes up, it brings life to the world and people live longer and they get superpowers and all kinds of different stuff. There's giants that emerge and stuff. But when those beams go down, the magic is gone. And we have the blue sky that we live in today, right? So we have to depend upon technology and stuff and invent machines and things because we no longer have access or connection to one another through plasma or the electrical field that was prevalent within our own atmosphere, right? It says Doctor Strange turned into Captain Universe in order to give them the power to repair the space wall that was separating the microverse from Earth. So there was a space wall that was separating the microverse, which is out there in the heavens or space, right, from Earth, which is this is a description of the firmament, but it's in a comic book, right? There's a lot of truth to these things. Now, here are some images just so you can get an idea of the sword in the star, the sword stuck in the star, right? So these are just drawings that I've come up with or found on the internet. This one I made, it shows the blue beam shooting up, and it meets at the very top up there where the depressurization point or the hole up in the sky is. Farida, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for my little sticker. All right, here's another example of the sword stuck in the star. This is Excalibur. This is the singing sword. This is the sword of truth that reaches up and it pierces the eye and puts out the eye of the evil god or the evil eye, right? And that's just that blue beam coming up out of Mount Meru, touching that mini dome that's upside down. So this larger part would be like the mini dome that's glowing red because the plasma on the other side of it is red. And then the middle part would be like the actual opening or whatnot. So we get back to the movie. There's all these little micronauts, microscopic creatures that they encounter riding on some sort of microorganism. And I know it's a microorganism because it splits in half and it separates. This is actually reproduction. This is called mitosis, right? This is one form of asexual reproduction, which is when a microscopic organism just splits itself in half in order to reproduce. So we're looking at microscopic entities and beings on a biological scale, tiny, in a movie that's showing us the truth of how these things actually work. They split in half and they go through mitosis, and that's how they reproduce. So Ant-Man gets captured. He's taken by all the little micronauts into their little camp, and his daughter's there, and she says, "Drink the ooze." Like just all weird. She's got this ooze dripping down from her mouth. Drink the ooze. So they force him, just like in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, they force him to drink this ooze or whatever, and it does something to him. This ooze comes from this creature over here, which is this like amoeba-looking guy. He represents the jelly, right? The jelly is symbolic of plasma, basically, right? Or electromagnetic energy that is ionized. That energy has the capability or the potential to connect your mind, your energy, your thoughts, your chakras, your auric field, however you want to call it, with those of others, which enables you to become telepathic. And he says, "Oh yeah, that's why you can understand me now, because they were all speaking, weird alien languages. But now all of a sudden, each one of them understands each other, which is also why when you're in the TARDIS with Doctor Who, the TARDIS allows you to be able to instantly interpret all these alien languages and stuff into something you understand because you're using telepathy because the energetic field is so strong within the TARDIS." All right, so she's talking to one of the micronauts and they're talking about this bad guy named Cain the Conqueror. And she says, "He will burn the world to find you," which is appropriate because it's plasma that comes down from above and it sets things on fire, right? Shrubberies and bushes and all kinds of stuff like that. It sets them all on fire. And his name is Cain, or his name is the Conqueror, basically. They just call him the Conqueror. They don't use his name a lot. But this is a picture of what he looks like. As you can see, sometimes they show him as being blue, which harkens back to the blue gods of old. I've done videos about that. These blue gods that show up. Now, I don't believe that these gods, well, I'm not inclined to believe that these gods were actually blue in color, but that they were white, or like almost an albino-like color, and they didn't have to be, okay? But my point is they were so close in proximity, landing right on Mount Meru, which has that giant blue beam that emanates from it, that light reflects off of their skin and makes it look like they're Smurfs, or makes it look like they're blue gods or blue creatures or Dr. Manhattan or whatnot, right? So who is Kang the Conqueror? I could tell you right now the word Kang is exactly the same word as Kong, which is exactly the same word as king, right? The kings are the conquerors. The kings are there to rule over, to divide and conquer. And that's who he represents. He represents that red plasma. Red plasma represents separation, which is beautiful. Like we need it. It's a tool that is useful for us in this world, as is unity. The key is a balance between the two, walking that middle path. Now, this is Kang the Conqueror. Now, you may have noticed we broke down the series Loki. On the right, this is his name is not Kang in Loki. This is the exact same dude, but they're different versions of each other within the fractalverse or the multiverse, you could say, right? The one on the right is like a good version, and he was in Loki. And what he was trying to do was unite all of the timelines or unite all of the separated timelines and bring them into one timeline. And Loki didn't understand that. He didn't like it. He didn't think it was a good idea. And Loki helped to actually split all of the timelines and create and introduce separation, or the illusion of separation, because there really is no separation, just the illusion of it. On the left, we have his other doppelganger, and there are infinite numbers of these guys. There's all kinds of them on every single timeline. There's going to be a version of Kang the Conqueror, right? This one, he's a conqueror. John, hey, thanks for gifting memberships to the chat. That's awesome. All right, let's move forward. All right, so Hank, Ant-Man's dad, I think, says, wow, there's actually beings down here, intelligent beings. Now, notice that when he says intelligent beings, look at one of these beings right here. It's literally, or it's physically actually a plasma ball with all of these little plasma strands coming off of it. And he says that they are intelligent beings, a subatomic universe. He says this changes everything, which is a catchphrase these days. Everybody's saying this changes everything. You know what I mean? Which is true. Every single thing that we do touches every single thing else in the world and in time and history. So everything changes everything, basically, right? But he says this changes everything that we know about life, evolution, and our place in the galaxy. Basically, he's saying this eradicates modern science. This eradicates what we're being shown and taught by NASA and Elon Musk of the fiction of looking out into the dark ceiling and imagining that we could travel through the dark space or whatever. Now, he meets this guy who's basically a head with like little tiny arms sticking out and like little tiny legs down below or whatever. And his name is MODOK. And you can see he's got like this red crystal right there where his pineal gland would be. And he shoots out this red plasma from his pineal gland. And all he wants to do is kill. That's his main deal. That's his purpose in life, is he's got all of this red plasma in his head or his mind or whatever. And he just wants to go around killing people. Now, in the movie, they say that MODOK stands for mechanical organism designed only for killing, which doesn't really equate to MODOK. But in other places, it actually says that it's a mental organism designed only for killing. This character right here represents plasma possession, okay? Which is the amplification of your already existent spirit energy. Basically, it means if you have negativity, selfishness, evil, hatred inside of you developing right now as you're developing your soul and your spirit, when the apocalypse comes, or when you are around an amplified energetic field, it will amplify however you are on the inside, your true self. So if your true self is selfish and evil and just stuck in a rut, right, and bad and stuff like that, just focusing on toxicity and negativity, it will become amplified. And you won't be able to help yourself, and you'll become a MODOK. You'll become plasma possessed, and you'll become an organism that is just a thrall to the plasma above, which has a prime directive to go and kill all life because it's a cleansing agent. That's what it's doing. It doesn't see itself as killing. It sees itself as cleaning up the house, basically, right? Now, they get to Kang, and he's talking to the mom, and he says, time. It is not what you think it is. Time is not what you think it is. That's what the movie is saying. I have my own theories about time and what time is, and I'm going to share that with you right now. Did you know smaller animals, like dogs or cats, smaller animals tend to perceive time as if it was passing in slow motion, a new study has shown. So if you imagine little dogs, little cats, insects, and stuff like that, it says that they perceive things in slow motion, okay? It's not that they live in slow motion, it's that we live in slow motion compared to them, because their metabolism is so fast and stuff, and ours is so much slower in comparison that they see us, and it's like we're moving in slow motion, right? Which is why they have shorter lifespans, because to them, they don't have short lifespans. They're living a full, long, healthy life. right? But we see them because we're bigger and we have different metabolisms and stuff. We live much longer lives. So our perception of time is different than theirs. So it says that their findings in this study show that small-bodied animals with fast metabolic rates can take in more information over a set unit of time compared with large-bodied animals with slow metabolic rates. Excuse me. In this way, small animals so experience time more slowly, which means that for Ant-Man and all those people that shrink down into the quantum realm, they're basically time traveling, right? They're going so slow while time up here is gone by, or maybe it's the inverse of that basically, but it's a time differential between what is very gigantic and what is very small. So oftentimes this is the reason why in the movies, when they show you giants and titans, I've been asked this in the comments section and in the chat, why do they always show giants moving in slow motion or whatever? Because it's your perception, because you're actually moving super fast. Your metabolic rate is so quick that you see all these other things and it's like they're taking forever to move. So they show you these giants that are essentially just moving about in slow motion. But if you saw it from the perspective of the giant, you're moving super fast. You know what I mean? It's all relative. Time is relative, basically. It all depends on your perspective, your experience, and where you are in comparison to where something else is within the fractalverse or the quantum realm. Now, the mom taps into King the Conqueror's mind. She says, I saw his mind. I saw what he was here to do. And then they show you these timelines, right? So when you see these like strings of plasma, just like when we broke down Loki, these are actual timelines. This is the illusion of separation. She said entire timelines gone, like they never existed. Now, it's really interesting because King the Conqueror in all of his forms usually ends up wanting to just rule one timeline. They have a whole council of kings and they all get together because it's a long backstory, but basically the original king or the original he who remains, right, figured out how to time travel or how to travel the fractalverse and visit all of those alternate Earths where he found alternate versions of himself. So having the knowledge he did, he went into those other worlds and shared that knowledge of how to travel the fractalverse with himself. So then every time he did that, those versions, they would travel the fractalverse and they would share this information with themselves so that they could be the ones with all of the information and therefore all of the power. Right? So they went around changing the timelines, which led to like space cops being developed and all these like time cops and stuff like that so that they could go around and not mess with time and how it's supposed to work out or whatever. But it's interesting. There's only two things that can happen. The illusion of separation or division, right? Which gets deeper and deeper and deeper the more we get into being divided, or unity and seeing the togetherness of all things, how all of these perceived timelines are actually one gigantic timeline. So she says all these timelines are gone, like they didn't exist. And you could see Kang the Conqueror exploding with energy. And then they show you the core of his spaceship, which blew up into this gigantic dome. I'll show you that in a little bit too. And they said that we have to get to the center, right? So this is a part of their little side quest, is they have to get to the center of this dome. Symbolically speaking, that is the dome, the electromagnetic field that goes up around the island at the middle of the world, which goes around Mount Meru. Okay, so there's domes within domes. There's an upside down dome above, which is projecting things into our sky. There is an electromagnetic dome that goes around the center island at the middle of the world. And they say that we have to get to the center. Right? Oftentimes in the movies, they'll say we have to go north, right? Because that's where the center is. To go northward, follow the compass until you get to the middle. The middle is the exit to the maze or the way out of each one of these dark cities, right? And then MODOK tells him you'll have to shrink down and pass through the eye of the storm, which is interesting because right around that central island on each one of these worlds, including ours, there is a current. And that current goes around. It's symbolized by a snake that wraps around and eats its own tail. And there's an eye of the storm where it gets calm and peaceful and quiet and temperate once again. He says, once you're inside, find the core. So the whole movie is all about getting to the core, the middle. Now, on one level, there is the core physically. getting to the middle of our world. And then when you get to the fractalverse, obviously you're going to want to find the middle of the fractalverse once you're out there in space or whatever, so that you can escape all of it. The simulation, the dream, the mind of God, however you want to say it, and basically collectively we wake up, right? So he says, once you're inside, you find the core. This can also be internalized because it's all fractal. Anything that can be internalized can also be externalized or presented physically. The spiritual is the internal, the internalization of these things. And that is finding ourselves, getting to know ourselves, understanding who we are, and understanding, a part of that understanding is that we are not individual, that we are one, that we are like literally have that. Hold on, let me see if you can see this. See, that's my hoodie, actually. It says all is one. I didn't even mean for that to happen. But anyways, that's finding yourself, is really finding yourself within others, right? Instead of seeing through the eyes of division and separation. All right, let's move forward. Now, speaking of division, whenever Ant-Man goes down into this world, he starts dividing, and there's all these different versions of himself, and they're just potential. It's kind of like that scene in The Matrix when Neo goes before the architect, and on all those TVs, he sees like various versions of himself or various potential versions of himself of outcomes that could have been. That's what you're seeing right here with Ant-Man. There's all these different versions of what Ant-Man could do, right? And what happens is because he sees himself, he doesn't recognize that it's actually him. He starts fighting with himself. Instead of being happy to see himself and hug himself, be like, oh my God, this is great. There's two of us, you know? But there's really not. This is fun. Let's play with this, right? They don't. Instead, they start fighting. They're like, wait, you're not the real me. I'm the real me. You're not the real one, right? You're an NPC. You're not real. You're just fake. You're just, you're a shadow or whatever. But in reality, they are all equally Ant-Man, all across. So at first, they start fighting with one another, and it looks like the movie's going to end and Ant-Man's going to die because he basically comes down on himself so hard that he would die, basically, right? Which happens to us in the real world. But when all of these different versions of Ant-Man work together, when they have one common purpose, right? Which is seen as like humanity working together, then they build this tower in order to get to the core, which is showing you like people going to Mount Meru and ascending the tower and stuff like that too, right? So this tower goes up higher and higher as all these different millions of Ant-Men are just clinging onto each other, building a bridge, helping out, because it doesn't matter which one of them gets to the middle as long as one of them gets to the middle. That's awesome. I think that's awesome. It doesn't matter. They all don't have to do it. Just one of them needs to do it because we're all connected, right? And this is exactly what ants do. And this is one reason why ants are so intelligent. Oftentimes considered one of the most intelligent of all of the insects that there are. And the main reason for that is not their individual intellect or the individual size of their brains or whatever. It's their ability to work together. They're so connected with one another that they can feel and sense one another sending signals. It's like ants are telepathic. And they work together to get things done. So if one ant dies, they understand it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. They're going to continue on working together. Can you imagine if humanity did that? Can you even imagine? I mean, look at us. Like, we're spread out all across this world and there's so many. Can you just imagine if for one day we all stopped fighting, stopped bickering, stopped comparing ourselves with one another as if we're so different, and we just did one thing together? That is the legend of Atlantis. They used to say that at one time throughout the day, every day, that the Atlanteans would stop and they would all focus on one thing. And they would send energy into like these crystals and stuff to keep the land safe or whatever. Just imagine what we could do if we came together. You see what like small pockets of individuals can do when they come together? God, imagine the entire world just doing one good thing together. I love thinking about that. Anyways, so they go to King the Conqueror and he says, I saw how it ends. And then they show you the circle, right? Exactly like that movie. I forgot what that movie was called. The Arrival? Was it called The Arrival with those big, giant black obelisk spaceships or whatever? And those alien creatures kept on drawing a circle over and over again. And the people are like, I don't get it. Like, maybe it's a whole language. Maybe it's a whole this. Maybe it's a circle. Maybe that's what it is. They're showing you the hole in the sky, the circle that opens up, right? And he says, I saw how it ends. And he shows you the circle right there. And he says that's what conquerors do. They burn the broken world and they make a new one. So it all depends on your perspective, right? Evil, good, etc. It all depends on where you are in that polarity, right? So you could see Kang the Conqueror as somebody who is evil, or Thanos, right? Snapping his finger and trying to wipe out, control the population and stuff like that. You could see that as evil. It depends on your perspective and where you are. But in reality, they believe that they're helping out. They believe that they're trying to make everything united, which is exactly the purpose of evil and good. Okay? They both want you to join them. They want everyone to join them. They both want to take over, and they all want to unite everything according to their common cause. So good and evil are two sides of the same coin. Now, the dad says, I've been picking up strange signals ever since we crashed. And then all throughout the movie, like he kind of like does this, like his ears are ringing, right? He stops and he goes down, and you could see it says low electrical warbling, right? So his ears are starting to ring. He's hearing this signal. He says, at first, I thought maybe it was a malfunction, some kind of strange interference or something, right? And remember, he and his family represent the truth seekers who are trying to find the middle and get to the core, which is us. So how many of you out there have done this recently where you're like, man, what is that sound, right? Like my ears are starting to ring, etc. We did a whole video about this. I presented this video right here, and you could look this up and check this video out. It says, are your ears ringing? They call it tinnitus. I have other theories about what this high-pitched ringing sound that many of us and some people are excluded from it, okay? I feel like it's awesome. I mean, I feel like it's irritating. Like lots of us do, right? Might keep you up or whatever. However, I feel like it's all happening to so many people all at once at a certain time whenever the energies are changing in our world and we're about to go through a polarity or electromagnetic reversal and stuff, that we are starting to pick up on these signals. Now in the movie, it came from the ants. The ants were the ones sending the signals. But it says here, there is a Hopi legend, a legend among the Hopi Indians, that during some earth volcanic eruptions in ancient times, right? So all of the plasma volcanoes around the world are like starting to go off and stuff. They were guided. The Hopi were guided by strange forces to ant people who were living in subterranean chambers who saved them. So they heard a calling. There is a calling that comes every cycle, and some people can hear that calling and they start having revelations and dreams and visions and all kinds of interesting stuff. And these were the ant people. The ant people were sending a signal up here to the larger or the smaller realm, the quantum realm, you could say, right? To try to help out. And that there are these legends of this. Now, this is really interesting. The sky god of Babylon was called Anu, right? Or On-U, which means of the heavens or of the sky. The Hopi word for ant is also Anu. And the Hopi root word was Naki, which means friends. So the Hopi called them ant friends, or sometimes they called them the Anu Sinum, which means the ant people. But if you call them the ant friend, if you spoke Hopi, you would say Anunnaki, which is exactly the same word as the Sumerian word for those otherworldly fractalverse travelers that float down into our world from time to time, just like in the quantum realm. He says it was the ants. The ants were the cause of the ringing in my ears. These ant people, these ant friends, the Anu Sinum or the Anunnaki. Whew, my God, isn't that sweet? Seriously. Hey, Sherry 333, thank you so much. I like your kind words more than the donation. Thank you. I appreciate you so much. All right, cool. Let's move forward. So the ringing in the ears, he said the ants were reaching out the whole time. Splash. I love when you guys splash the popcorn. It's so fun to look at. The ants were expanding their knowledge, expanding their science. So while people on the surface world are busy moving around in slow motion, right? Barely advancing. The ant people down there are advancing at a super fast rate, and their technology is becoming more and more advanced, or in the movie it was at least. And then let's move forward. So we get to the part where one of the characters is trying to tell everybody to get together, right? To like fight Kang the Conqueror. And how they're going to beat him, she says, come to the tower. fight back. That same Mount Meru tower that we were talking about earlier. And notice how the blue light is shining on her face, making her face blue or bluish green, right? Kind of like in Dark City, those white creatures, those white humanoid beings, those aliens or whatever, when they went down into the earth or whatever, they were all lit up blue, or they looked sort of like a bluish green, just like that too. So she says, come to the tower. And she's talking to all the people in the quantum realm in that city or whatever, which is us. Okay. She says, I know you've been waiting. Now is the time to strike. So this is a hidden message for some of us. Okay. Indicating when we need to go and make this exodus, when we need to go and make this journey to the place of safety so that we can defeat the conqueror and not be killed by the conqueror and survive the apocalypse, right? She says, I know you've been waiting. I know you've been waiting. You've been waiting. You know the world sucks. You've been depressed. You've been full of anxiety. You feel like energy's on crazy high right now. The world is just going nuts. Everything's becoming more separated, and it's falling apart at the seams, and people want out. People want things to change, and they will. They're not going to stay this way forever. Hold on. Got to adjust. All right. So she says, I know you've been waiting. I know you've been waiting to go to Mount Meru. I know you've been waiting to leave your local earth or whatever and leave this particular school of thought and move on to the next one, right? Now is the time to strike. When? When is the time to go? When is the time to move? Well, if you look at the story of the Exodus in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the time was whenever there was about to be war, right? And the Pharaoh was getting all his armies all ready and everything. And right before or right during the time that there is some sort of a threat of worldwide war, because the energy gets so amplified that the people respond in turn and in kind. So they start warring with each other. They start swarming. It's basically swarming. But when humans swarm a lot, we call it war or looting and rioting and pillaging and all that type of stuff, right? When you see that stuff starting to happen, the world and the powers that run this world can't protect their boundaries and stuff. They're distracted by their little bickerings that they have with one another, and it goes into chaos. And so they can't keep track of everybody. That is the time to go. At least that's what the movie is indicating, right? So this is Ant-Man's daughter. And she says, he knows he can't take all of us. And you see how she looks right into the camera? He knows he can't take all of us, right? So we all just leave from the four corners of the world all at the same time. And it's a race. It's a race to Mount Meru. It's a race to Witch Mountain, you could say, right? To quote another movie title. A race to Witch Mountain. All right, anyways. So you see Ant-Man here. He's grown to huge sizes. He's fighting off everybody. And he says, there's so many. And these people surround him. And then help shows up, right? Help in the form of all these little micronauts and all these creatures from the fractalverse that swarm in and they come down. Take a look at these things. Take a look at them, right? Now, let's go back to being inside of a greater body, right? Or a biological entity, I guess we could call it, right? Some other entity. We are inside of another entity that also might be inside of another entity because it's fractal, right? But look at these creatures. Do they remind you of anything? Check this out. This article right here says, beneficial bacteria may also protect us against their dangerous relatives that cause disease by crowding them out in the gut. Just like how Ant-Man was being crowded out and he said, there's too many or whatever, right? And then in come these quantum creatures that happen to look exactly like bacteria, producing acids and inhibiting their growth and stimulating the immune system to fight them off. It is a war. This is bacteria or some form of something like that inside of the fractalverse, inside, out there beyond the limitation of our sky where we are protected from all this stuff, right? Because we are in development before we are released. Okay, so we're being developed right now. But this is like bacteria coming to the rescue, right? They see that all this bad bacteria or bad, stuff inside of the body is attacking Ant-Man or whatever, which in turn attacks us collectively. So all this bacteria swarms in, and these are the creatures that we see. And then it shows you that little amoeba guy who's responsible for making the goo that makes people telepathic, right? He opens up huge, grows to this huge size and swallows up the bad guys, right? Just like white blood cells and stuff do in our body, right? They go and they look for things that are bad or toxic or poisonous and they eat them. It's a war. There is a war inside of us that is going on for our very own livelihood, right? Which is really interesting. So what part are you going to play? That's what I'm asking. I mean, that's a question I ask myself, really, but I'm also asking you because we're connected. What part are you going to play in that war? Are you going to stand idly by as evil wages against good inside of you, trying to take you over? Or are you going to help out the rebels? So anyways, this guy grows, this amoeba dude grows to huge sizes. Now Ant-Man, or King the Conqueror, he puts this protective dome type thing around this pyramid structure. So this is also the secret island at the middle of the world, the Garden of Paradise, etc. That has an electrical arc that goes around it. This is the serpent, protecting, or this is the fiery sword that protects the way to the Garden of Eden, etc. And also, this is fractal, so it also represents the dome of our world. And outside of our world, things are gigantic. Okay, like I said, we're very tiny. If we were able to go out there right now, we have shrunk down, okay, just like Ant-Man does. Over time, we have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk because pressure is building and building and building and pushing in on us on all sides and our offspring, generation after generation, making us smaller and smaller. All right, so his daughter gets the ability to grow, and she's like, I'm huge, and she's all squealing and excited about it because she's a giant just like her dad or whatever. And she goes, oh, I'm so hungry, right? The second she becomes a giant, that's the first thing on her mind is she develops a hunger, which is really interesting because the legends in various works like the Book of the Giants, the Book of Enoch, etc., these ancient legends that talk about the giants and how they lived indicated that there came a time of hunger. Hunger didn't used to exist at first because there was so much energy in the world, people didn't need it. They were energized all the time. They didn't need to eat. But when that energy started to dwindle and they were still gigantic, all of a sudden they needed more energy, which created a hunger, which means they now needed to eat and put things in there to be digested so that they could get more energy from what they were eating or whatever, which is why the giants started to eat everything in sight. If you read these ancient literature, it will tell you that the giants became so hungry, they started to eat everything. They consumed all sorts of things. And it started with the giants. But as the energy dwindled, that hunger was passed on to the smaller forms and the smaller forms and the smaller forms until we have today where we are all consumers. And we consume and we eat because there is a strong hunger that exists in the world because there is a lack of energy, aka a lack of spirit in the world today. So it develops this hunger. So the giants go around, they start eating everything, eventually becoming cannibalistic and eating, their relatives and stuff who are tiny versions. The Titans and stuff did that. So she says, I could eat everything, right? And this is what happens whenever they become gigantic and their metabolism grows. Just like an elephant needs to eat like a ridiculous amount of food every single day just to work its body, just to walk around in slow motion or whatever, right? All right, so King the Conqueror gets pissed off because Ant-Man busted through his little energetic dome and he starts to go to war and fight. And then Hank comes out, the dad, and he's got a whole army of ants. All these ants come out of the woodworks to fight. Now, this is your classic, the Ant-Man, the inner earth beings who are released whenever our barriers go down during the energetic neutral point, and those heavenly beings that descend, right? Up there is typically associated with the red plasma. Down inside the earth, or the terrestrial energy, is usually associated with goodness and things. So you have a war instantly. They clash with one another. They know about one another, right? So you have the ant people versus the heavenly people, basically. Or the inner earth terrestrials versus the extraterrestrials, right? And then we're just caught in the middle. Basically, the humans are like bystanders, like, what is going on? All right, so we would be like in the Lord of the Rings, we would be like hobbits, basically, okay? And that's why we have gigantic feet right now, too, because of, anyways. All right, so King makes another dome, another energetic barrier. All these ants start crawling around on it, which is exactly what I showed you earlier, just it's a different, they're bigger, on that Love, Death, and Robots episode, where all of those Fantazoids were crawling around on the outside of that world, or the dome of that world, right? So imagine when that dome comes down, monsters reappear. Dinosaurs, whatever you want to call them. I call them Fantazoids. They reappear. Salam, Hamed Fakir. Good to see you. All right. So remember that dude who was plasma possessed? Well, he had a talk with Ant-Man's daughter, and she was kind to him. She totally could have killed him. She whooped him in a fight and stuff. And she's like, dude, why don't you do something else? You don't have to go around killing. And he's like, he's plasma possessed. He's like, well, what else do I do? Why don't you just tell me? Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Because those who are plasma possessed, they thrive on orders, on being told what to do. And whenever that plasma is cut off from space by our dome that goes back up, it doesn't know what to do. It's just used to killing and being bad and separation and division and stuff like that, right? Welcome back, Hamed. All right. So she told him, look, you don't have to be a dick. It's that simple, man. You can choose to be kind. You know, many of us feel like this way. We're so used to being stepped on and mistreated, and we learn. This is why this is our school of thought. We learn these things as we go through our own experiences, and there's a temptation to become like the evil that is here to teach us to actually do good, right? So she says, you don't have to do that. You don't have to choose evil. You don't have to continue being bad and continue in your old, bad, selfish, evil ways. You can turn from that. You can make a different choice the next time you have one, and you can choose to do good. And man, for people who have been doing bad for so long, when you actually make that first step and you choose, it's scary, but it's a relief. I'm telling you right now, it's a relief when you love instead of hate. When you're so used to being full of hatred and fear and anxiety and stress and jealousy and anger. So she tells him, that's the good news. In the Bible, it's called repentance. Just turning away and choosing to do good. She says you don't have to be a dick. And he comes out of the woodworks. He says he comes to fight for the good guys, for the rebels. He says, my name is Darren. And I am not a dick. And he breaks open that dome or whatever. So this is cool. That means that there's hope, okay? For people who are plasma possessed, for people who feel like, you know, their spirit is just seared and sealed off and they're just stuck. They're so used to being bad or doing evil or whatever. It's not too late. It's not too late. You can change. You can make a good choice. You can try it out, you know? And if you do, it's going to feel good. I promise. All right. Hey, Lord Racer. Ah, right on. Good to see you, Lord Racer. All right, cool. We're almost done. So King the Conqueror gets sent back into some other realm, some other place or whatever. Right? Now, take a look at this picture and compare it to the picture of what I showed you earlier. Totally forgot the dude's name, but that World Eater. Right? You know who it was, right? But it's the exact same picture. Whenever he was getting sucked back into the dome or in the sky in that game Fortnite. Oh, it was Galactus, right? So this is Galactus, basically, the World Eater, being pulled back into the dome or being cut off. And you could see it even looks like glass. It looks like something is fractured right there. It symbolically represents our sky. And he's being cut off because the electromagnetic barrier goes back up because that polarity reversal is finished. And so is him. And you can see there's all that red plasma and stuff that's sort of seeping out or whatever. They show you this in Stranger Things and so many other TV shows and series. And, you know, I mean, it's all over the place. All right, so they hug each other. They're happy. They defeated King the Conqueror. They made it to the tower. They were able to tell everybody, and they listened to the calling of the ants. This is all symbolic of our own journey, whether you be on one internally or you're looking to escape the physical, actual Earth prison, school of thought, whatever you want to see it as. This is what you're watching when you're seeing Ant-Man and the Wasp, QUANTUMANIA. And then they look right at you, holding on to each other as they say goodbye, and they give you a word of advice. They say, let's go home. Find the center place. Let's go home. Ant-Man and the Wasp, QUANTUMANIA, which is not the end of the movie. Actually, there's some post-credit scenes. So they show you, right? I told you there's all those different King the Conquerors throughout the multiverse. Each world, each Earth has its own or whatever. And they show you this one. And they're trying to decide what to do about, taking over the quantum realm, the fractalverse, the multiverse, etc., and controlling time, controlling all of these timelines because they want to rule those timelines, right? And they show you like the pharaoh version, right? So this entity existed in ancient Egypt and in Atlantis and in other places, you know, like Babylon and Sumeria and stuff. This is something that is reoccurring. Okay, this is a personification of an energetic occurrence in our world that shows up from time to time to conquer, to take control, to change the world. And they're talking about us. They're having this little powwow, and they say they're beginning to touch the multiverse, which is what we are doing right now during this live stream. I'm so excited. That's what we're doing. We are beginning to touch the multiverse, right? Forget NASA, forget space, forget visiting the moon and Mars and all that dumb stuff. We are beginning to tune into and tap into a reality that is not shown to us in academics and is not shown to us in modern and mainstream educational thought. This is ancient. It's something that is ancient that we have forgotten, and that's what I call ancient oblivion. So they open up the windows to the sky, and they can see out into the fractalverse, all the plasma conduits that are going everywhere, which are basically like neurons, right? These are all like neurons. Like if you're inside of the mind of God, you open up a window in the sky, you would look out and you would see synapses, synaptic events, dendrites and neurons and all kinds of interesting things. It looks like you're inside of a brain, basically, right? And they say, well, if we let them, they're beginning to tap into the multiverse, you and I. And if we let them, they will take everything. That's because eventually it all comes back together, right? Everything returns because separation and stuff is an illusion, right? So then they show you all those different timelines or whatever, which is exactly like if you were to open up the windows of the heavens and look into the mind of God. These are informational highways that are moving about that transport you from this earth to that earth, or this earth to that earth, and this earth to that earth. And all of those earths are just developing little experiences, which are angels and demons or homunculi within the mind of God, which is us trying to help ourselves, right? Trying to convince ourselves to make a decision for good, which is selfless, or evil, which is selfish, right? Or, you know, of course, there's the option of the neutral path, right? And that is Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. Or is it? Actually, there's another post-credit scene. So check this out. They show you, they actually skip over to Loki. So they're showing you an episode from Loki now that we haven't seen yet. And Loki is way back in time right now with Owen Wilson. I forgot what his character name was, but they're like time cops, basically. They're fractalverse cops. They're trying to stop these people from landing in other worlds and teaching them about the fractalverse, because the first rule of the fractalverse is you don't talk about the fractalverse. Why? Because it defeats the purpose of being separated and cut off from the rest of it. We are being developed in here, and there are those agencies, we'll say, that would like to keep it that way. You're not supposed to know about what is outside until you're ready to be born into that world, okay? You have to be developed first. You have to be ready for it. And if you look around the world today, most people are not ready for it, right? So they don't want the information getting out there. Like I said, I feel like we're so close to the next reset that it almost doesn't matter. People have told me, like, dude, be quiet. Like, the men in black are going to show up at your house or whatever. Sweet. It matters not to me, because I cannot die. I don't believe in death. I believe that there are fractal versions of me out there right now, tuning in, hearing this message from myself as I am hearing it from myself, if that makes sense to you. Anyways, so they show you Victor Timely way back in, like, I don't know, the 20s or something. And these curtains open up and they show you this little invention that he has, which kind of reminds me of the shrink ray beam in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And he says, time. He's talking about time. He says, perhaps we can shape it. And he says it, which is really interesting too, because it is code name for Cthulhu. It is a code name for the mind of God that is so incomprehensible because it is so grand, and at the same time so small because it's everywhere, that people can only refer to it as it, because it cannot be fully described because it is everywhere and everything. And then it shows Loki, and he's like, it's him. And then Owen Wilson's like, wow. Like, you think he's a terrifying figure? Wow. I'm just kidding. He doesn't say wow, but I wish he would. And Loki's like, yes, he is terrifying. Bum, bum, bum. Ominous music plays, and that is actually the end. It says, Kang will return. That is Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. And I am JayDreamerZ. I have fully enjoyed this presentation with all of you. I do look forward to reading the chat once it loads. It usually takes about 30 minutes to an hour for the chat to load. But I can't wait to read the comments and to hear all of your thoughts. I especially enjoy listening to what parts of the presentation resonated with you the most and hearing your ideas. Until next time, I'm JayDreamerZ saying good vibes and goodbye.
Cool.